Hi everybody, this is Hero with the Birds back with another Shadowlands video. In this video I'd like to take a look at Halls of Atonement 7 key with Venthyr as a Holy Paladin. And the purpose of this video is just to walk through some of the gameplay of specifically a Holy Light oriented Paladin, meaning we're taking Inflorescence as our legendary and we're utilizing the buff to Holy Light through infusion to cast far more Holy Lights in kind of a ranged scenario. One of the reasons this can actually be fairly advantageous is showcased by the nature of this week's affixes. Specifically, the affix that has Spiteful Shades charging at party members, forcing you out of melee, makes it slightly more tedious to try and manage, especially on higher keys. The 7's not that bad, but to try and manage your positioning, especially if you bring a lot of melee to your group. So you'll probably see a lot of people looking for ranged healers in pugs for this week, especially if you're pushing a 10 or 15 key. You'll see a lot of people looking for ranged DPS as well, because the tank is obviously always going to be a melee. And these Spiteful Shades will pop out of a mob whenever you kill it. It fixates on a target and then it will just run them down. Now when the Spiteful Shade melees you, it does quite a lot of damage, obviously more damage as you increase the level of the dungeon. What I'd like to show today is just how to counteract that with some of the tools that Holy Paladin has in its kit, and specifically some of the throughput tools that the Holy Light build offers. You'll notice alongside this I'm using Beacon of Virtue, and that's because due to the fact that we will be in melee range less, we're not going to get as much value out of Crusader's Might. You can see my talents on the left side there. You can see my item level and the breakdown for my secondary stats on the right. And we're going to be making use of the Focused Light Conduit. Part of the reason for that is the Focused Light Conduit improves our uptime on infusion buff, meaning the Holy Shocks we do cast are going to proc infusion more often, and that'll just help us ensure that we have an infusion cast when we need it. We're taking Virtue here because we're not going to be trying to reset our Holy Shocks to make Glimmer work, which is a core feature of Crusader's Might. And instead we'll just lean on the throughput that we get out of pressing Virtue. Just a note here, you can always cast a Holy Light before you cast Beacon of Virtue. Here I messed up and pulled some ads. You can always cast a Holy Light before you press Beacon of Virtue, and when you press Beacon of Virtue, the Holy Light that you cast before it will land and actually heal your party up. So you get a few more seconds out of that window. I think that was the only major oopsie for the dungeon if I recall. Otherwise it goes fairly smoothly. And mostly I just want to show you what does it look like to deal with specifically the Spiteful affix. As a Holy Paladin, where are some of the cramped areas? We're here in a halls, which is actually quite open, so you can fairly easily navigate, but there are situations like this one here that are a little tenuous, and if you're playing on a higher key, you'd want to really min-max your utility, because as you'll see, as soon as one of these mobs dies and the Spiteful Shade comes out, I need to make a decision about moving into new mobs to my left, or just bubbling or CCing this Spiteful mob. So that's going to be a recurring theme for a lot of dungeons, and Halls is somewhat forgiving for the first half of it, because outside of this position here, where people just drop down, it tends to be fairly open so that you can kite your Spiteful back to areas that you were previously at. You don't have to worry too much about ads or picking things up. But just be aware that one of the problems you're going to have if you try to play the Glimmer build is having to weave in and out. It doesn't mean you can't do it, it just means it will be somewhat less effective. That's actually going to be compounded by the problem of grievous. So this doesn't have the grievous affix, but what I've noticed with these two working together is the pressure by a Spiteful Shade to shove you out of melee range means that whenever grievous is going off, you're going to be doing the kind of thing that Holy Paladins do not want to be doing at all costs, which is moving away from a mob. The movement part means you can't even really make use of any of your other skills, Martyr's not that great unless you're taking Untempered or you're really playing around it, but it's not awesome in dungeons. So you don't really have very many tools outside of Holy Shock to deal with throughput while you're on the move, specifically away from mobs. So with Grievous, your Glimmer build is not going to be quite as effective because the Glimmer ticks that hit do not take off a stack of Grievous, and therefore, even though the throughput's okay, you're going to struggle to pull people up to the 90% threshold. Whereas I think with Virtue guys, after a couple of GCDs, you can see here, you can top people fairly quickly. And I would recommend this week or weeks like this where you're getting shoved out of melee to consider using something like Beacon of Virtue, even if you're playing a standard Crusader's Might build. Even if you've got Shock Barrier, Grievous is just going to tick too hard, and Holy Paladin does not possess the tools to rapidly heal up the entire group in 1 or 2 shots outside of the use of Virtue. Now you could say, well, Divine Toll, but here we're playing Venthyr, and so the question becomes, how do other covenants deal with these sorts of things? And I mean, the typical answer I get is re-roll, but as you'll notice, Venthyr has a couple of advantages specifically on Halls of Atonement. The main one being that you can grab a number of gargoyles around the encounter in the first half specifically, and you can use them to do quite a lot of damage to a number of bosses. You can have specifically the first 2 bosses, this big Anima Golem here, and then, the first boss and the third boss have access to a golem that you can use. We're using it on Trash in this case. I'm not sure if I actually end up bringing it all the way through to the boss. But the point is that there are a lot of really valuable contributions that Venthyr makes specifically on Halls of Atonement. The Hallow, Ashen Hallow, is a really, really great ability for either Tyrannical, where you're saving it for bosses, or on really hard packs in certain dungeons. Think Theater of Pain. Some of those corridors are really nasty. And Hallow is great because it offers the Paladin a kind of passive, ongoing AoE healing to your entire group who are likely to be within the region. And that healing is something that just goes on without you using any other abilities. Now, Divine Toll is good, and I think I would really recommend it for dungeons if that's the only content that you're working on, because it's a get-out-of-jail-free card, whether you're playing Glimmer or not. But there's a lot of damage coming out of Venthyr due to the Hammer of Wrath and due to the ability itself. Obviously, we could even think about the Venthyr Conduit, which is going to add even more damage and healing into that ability. So it's pretty strong all on its own if you are building your Mythic Plus comp around very specific strategies, which as you go up and you get higher and higher, you will likely need to do. It just won't be good enough that you have Glimmer throughput. You'll want to plan out specific CDs for different encounters. And Hallow, I like it because it's 30 seconds worth of throughput. That just eases the Paladin off. Sometimes you Divine Toll, and sure, you top everybody, but then they immediately take a bunch of damage, and you're back to the same problem of having no way to really simultaneously heal everybody at the same time. So you can see us moving through the second portion of Halls. I think we try to sneak up the stairs to the second boss. I'm really enjoying the Holy Light build because it's a kind of mid-range healer in dungeons. You can Crusader Strike while you don't need anything else to happen. So you can see me here pouring most of my holy power into Shield of the Righteous, putting my shocks into the enemies rather than healing up my friends. And it's fairly easy to transition back and forth between the two of these. Bestow Faith isn't absolutely necessary. Light's Hammer could be used as well, especially in higher keys. But one of the things I like about Bestow is it gives us one other button to press when we are moving out of melee due to Spiteful, and we have to heal something like Grievous specifically. On a fortified Grievous week, Halls of Atonement, especially this upcoming pack, is really nasty for lots of tanks. You can never get them up to that threshold, and just bombing Holy Lights often is difficult because they're slow. Even I have 31% haste, but trying to smash a bunch of Holy Lights into this Prot Warrior is not going to do it. This boss features a good example of how virtue can shine. Here we can just top one person, but we're also simultaneously grabbing other people while we focus our attention on this druid. So all of our healing going into him is translated into others. And that's one of the things that I really want to stress for you, especially with grievous, especially with necrotic. So these kinds of tough corridors where people are going to attract the attention of this fixate, and they're trying to do damage and move around. It's kind of scuffed. People are running all over the place. Throwing out your virtue guarantees that whoever you're focusing on is also going to top off anybody else that happens to take damage in that window. And I want to be clear that obviously Kyrian is good. Obviously Glimmer is a great resource, even for Mythic Plus, but it has some limitations. And one of the limitations is it is punishing for those people who can't execute it really well or at a high level for the entire encounter. It's punishing if people make a lot of mistakes in your group. So if you're pugging, like I think this is just kind of a random pug that I got, you're going to expect that people are going to take extra damage. You're going to expect they'll stand in bad. The communication is not quite the same. And while we don't champion that, you want to be with groups that are going to do well and are going to be able to communicate with one another. It's better for you as the healer to bring tools that can manage these situations. We grab the other Stoneborn here for this boss. I think on Tyrannical Weeks especially, the Venthyr Covenant is really helpful for pushing out a ton of damage. And I decide, obviously, we don't need to do this, but I decided to hold Hallow for the last boss. And the reason I'm doing that is because the last boss actually puts out a lot of damage in the second half of the fight when he's drawing in power from the 4 statues. It's nice to have that throughput available if you need it. So this group was doing fairly high DPS. I already had a gargoyle coming into this fight. I didn't really think it was that necessary to pair the gargoyle on top of the Ashen Hallow. But if you think about it, for Halls of Atonement, Venthyr is gaining access essentially to 2 major DPS cooldowns for these 2 bosses, boss 1 and 3. And then you could have put Hallow down on bosses 2 and 4 if you wanted, saving your first Hallow for those big packs that drain off the anima to unlock the first boss. You can start to see a package that might work well together for this encounter. And I think I spoke in another video about Mythic Dungeon tools, but you can start to plan these things out for yourself and for your group, thinking, okay, I'm going to use Hallow here, I'm going to use a gargoyle there, then we'll use another Hallow here, and so forth and so on. And this adds just an incredible amount of damage to your group. All of it passive damage, which is exciting because you don't have to work for it. You just drop it down and off it goes. On single target, it's going to do a ton just to the boss. It's also just going to cover any mistakes that people make so you can focus your attention on actually killing the boss. Kyrian really falls down when it comes to single target throughput. Sure, you can throw 1 shock into the boss with the Kyrian, or you can heal people's mistakes, which is really good, but you don't have quite the same damage threshold. If you played this with full Glimmer, full Crusader's Might, throwing every shock into this boss with wings, with lust, you can get up to 7 or 8k DPS at like 190. So if you think about the utility of that for a tyrannical boss, it makes Venthyr kind of an exciting covenant. We devo this first one. We've got our Hallow down. So one thing I'm thinking is I'm probably going to use Bubble on this second one because I don't have my devo open. I was kind of focused on damage, though this group is doing well, so it doesn't look like we'll need it. But the Holy Light build, again, just allowing us, when Infusion comes out, to really pump up the numbers. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, just to showcase a little bit of the new affix and how we can deal with it as a mid-range pally. We will catch you guys again next time.